Welcome to Christian Authors Community. We are authors helping authors. We get together once a week and have a roundtable discussion about how we can use our platforms to further the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you want to learn more about what we do or how to join us, head on over to our website at authorscommunity.net. Let's jump into today's meeting.
We have Cheri Fields with us this morning, and she's going to tell us everything we need to know about editing of all types. Does that cover it, Cheri?
Well, sort of. That's a big ask, but yeah, I'm actually thinking Kim and Michelle, if there's ever anything. Now I'm going to be sharing, so I'll probably need help. If you guys have something to say, just jump in to help me out, because like fiction is generally not my thing. But yeah, I am going to try to do a basic introduction to all the different levels of editing. So let me see if I can figure out how to share. I think that's how I do it. Okay, so are you seeing my computer? Can you see my what to expect from editing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so yeah, all I see is Tom, so I'll have to just jump in. So I started out as an editor from the back way. I started out with my own blog in February of 2012, and one of the things I knew right away is, first of all, nobody was going to fix it, and I had to look as professional as I possibly could. So I started to work. The first thing that I learned is how a semicolon actually works. I was so excited to finally understand how that worked. And then make sure I find Grammarly and different things to help me with spelling and the things that I wasn't great for. So I started to develop my skills for my own writing. And then as even when I had a fairly small audience, creation science was my field, still is. And I would get these books that were self-published from other creationists, and they'd say, hey, could you review it? And I started to read it over and think, oh, if only they had tweaked this, rearranged that whole section on what was taught in schools 50 years ago, teenagers aren't going to care about. They should have just cut it. There are all these things that I was like, if only I'd had my hands on this before it went to press. And eventually in 2019, there's one Christian editors conference in the country, and it was meeting in my town of Grand Rapids, Michigan, which kind of makes sense. I was able to attend, and everything that they said about the top level editing, which we will see next here, the developmental and substantive editing, that was so me. As I was pointing out when I first got on, I am so up in the air in the stratosphere looking at the big picture that I'll forget my kids' dentist appointments and forget to run the laundry. The stuff at the bottom end of this spectrum is hard for me, but we're all somewhere in this mix. So as the years have gone by, I've learned how to do everything and talk to editors. And one of the things you will not find, while I have given names to these different aspects of editing, you do not find hard and fast titles for any of them. Every editor uses their own terminology. So you're going to want to know what's being done and then check with any individual person. Because what one person calls copy editing is somebody else's heavy copy and somebody else's line, and they won't use those terms. Proofreading's pretty standard and formatting. But the others, it depends on who you're talking to, what terms they'll use for that. So eventually, I think I put this particular slide together about 6 months as it started to feel like the way a rainbow, while this picture has a very distinct line between the red and orange, when you're looking at one that God made, there's a variation where you've got like scarlet in between the orange, and then there is like the orange fades into the yellow, which fades into the others. So, and that's very much the way it feels in editing. So this is a total will, then I'm going to break these down, but this is just one of the things that I do run into is a lot of people when they've got their first projects will want a proofread straight away. As far as they're concerned, their book is beautiful. All it needs to do is be checked for typos. And if a professional editor who understands the genre, what the market wants, what the reader wants, and they'll realize this needs to go way back up to the beginning. If you proofread a mess, you're going to ruin your reputation. So for all of us, especially for this is a first project, you're probably going to need to have somebody look over it at the top level. Let's structure this thing before we start worrying about where to put the commas. And because there is no point fixing the grammar on a section of writing that needs to be rewritten completely. And as I point out in the green box, you're going to be naturally good at one of these and struggle in others. I did a project last fall for a pastor's wife. She was excellent at the sentence level. And even at the paragraph level, as a general rule, her paragraphs would have a nice flow. But when it got to the bigger overall structure, it was such a wreck. It took me a bunch of hours just to figure out what the overall flow she needed. And that's just the way God wired her. It's okay. We're all somewhere, and I've got to really slow down and focus, either get help or really struggle to get the finer details because the overall structure comes so naturally to me. All right, so what does it look like when you're first starting the top level editing? This can happen when all you have is a dream. If you know somebody who can help you, and to do true developmental editing is done before the first draft. It's when you say, okay, I've got this idea, this is where I want to head, and take it, and you sit down with somebody and ask these questions. And who is my audience is a very specific question. This isn't all Christians. That's a really bad way to sell a book. I was actually at this year's PennCon for Christian Editors Conference, and they got so specific. One of the guys says, don't even have a single person avatar. Actually write for a real person that you know. That a lot of times, if you can ask a best-selling author who's the intended audience, they will be able to name the person they wrote it for. And as I was thinking about it, I wish I had known that before I wrote my own book, because while mine is very specifically focused on a 14-year-old Christian homeschooler, if I had written it for my oldest daughter, it would have been quirkier and more fun, and other people would probably have gotten a kick out of the dynamic between me and my daughter. And so that's something that there's a real power in getting that specific. So if you have that in mind before the first sentence goes on your page, that's going to save you a ton of rewriting. Then you want to start with, where are you going to end up? What is the point of the book? A lot of times, things that end up having to be cut later could have been avoided if you ask yourself before you wrote down a scene or a section, where am I heading? What is the point of the book? Is this helping me get there? Then if you have that before, it will really save you on time and effort. Yeah, always remember, this isn't a marketable product. If you're writing for your own sake, that's called a journal or a diary. If you're writing a book that you intend for others, it has to be of benefit to them. Don't just write for catharsis if it's going to go into your book manuscript that you publish. Because there's nothing wrong with writing catharsis, writing so that you know what you think, but that's a different thing than a book. All right, then it really helps to know what the market is looking for. It doesn't mean you change or fold or that your message gets softer to be more palatable to the market. But if you can angle how you write for what people are already wanting to buy, that gives you a real advantage. They're more likely to hear your message if they're already interested in whatever you have to offer. So if you can find that out before you put your fingers to the keyboard, it really helps. So then you have structural editing. This can start before, like if you think of in school, if you learned how to do an outline, that's a lot of what's happening with structural editing For me, I often come in after an author thinks they're nearly ready. And that's when I come in and help with the structural editing. Well, this piece here, actually, a third of the way into the book is actually what you want for the opening scene. It would be so amazing, and pull that up there. And then how are we going to present this? So um, if you know the structure of your book beforehand, it'll be much easier. You can avoid writer's block. So if you're that kind of person who can think in outlines, or if you can bring somebody in, if you just want to talk to somebody who does think this way, it's usually about $60 an hour. And if you can talk to them for half an hour and get that basic outline, that'll save you so much time and it'd be totally $30. And you'll notice at the bottom, I mentioned that there are options at this point. A lot of times, because a full structural edit for me costs 4.6 cents a word. So if you think of a 50,000 word document, that's getting to be a chunk of change. I also offer a critique, which I charge 1 penny a word, and that's way cheaper. You still want to have it as trimmed as you can to start out with. And the basic difference, at least for me, is that a critique, I read the whole thing through in both. A critique, I'll only give sample, here's what I'm talking about comments, instead of commenting every time something comes up. That it's me having to slow down, fill out a comment, write it out. That gives you the extra price. So that's something that you can totally bring somebody in. That's my favorite thing to do, is a critique, because I don't have to worry about where the commas go and how it's spelled and all that stuff. All I'm looking at is the essential aspects of the story, and for me, mostly nonfiction. Okay, excuse me. So in fiction, there are lots of different nuances to this, but if you don't know about story structure, the most common one that people will talk about is the hero's journey. You even see this, certainly, Star Wars Episode 4 with Luke Skywalker. George Lucas, on purpose, went to hit every point of what he had been taught about what the hero's journey. So if you break it down, you can look at that. You start it with somebody who's not comfortable, and they're naive, and they've got their own view of the world, and then they're forced against their will to go on this journey, and they learn all kinds of things, and they're able to save the day, usually them against and there are all kinds of subgenres, like the thriller. You have the hero versus a villain all by themselves. Nobody else is there. That is like the law. And every genre for fiction has certain prerequisites. You must include this scene. You must include these elements. That's where it really helps if you already enjoy reading in a genre. You'll already know what are the particular elements. And things like Story Grid will break this down for you beautifully. One of the more interesting ones, and I forgot to look up how to spell it, I believe it's chiastic structure. If you think of the Greek letter chi, looks like an X. So it's actually, you could call it a crisscross structure. It's one of my favorites because it is so satisfying. And as you see the Bible does it, and I'll show you more in a little bit how it works out. But like if you've ever read the children's book Holes, it has all kinds of elements at the beginning that come back, come full circle, and are resolved at the end. And he is brilliant at that because he has several different storylines, the Texas storyline and the Eastern European one, and the families, how they come together and turn their fates around because of different choices they make. Beauty and the Beast is one I heard recently was introduced to, that you have all these elements at the beginning with the townsfolk in the first, where she's singing about she's bored of her life, and then at the end the townsfolk are attacking the beast. You have all these different, the same people, the same settings, flipped as people make different choices. And I'll show you the Bible in a minute. All right, then for nonfiction, it's fairly straightforward. Most people start out with a tension here's what's wrong. In fact, I find this first one, the pain point solution practical, really frustrating if I already know my pain points so much and they spend like a third to a half of the book just telling me how rotten life is. And it's like, yes, I already know this. Would you just tell me what to do about it? So, but it's a great way to pull people in and say, okay, this person gets where I am. And then a lot of times the solution can be quite short if it's just like a mindset shift, and then you can flesh it out with, okay, so now you know you've got to rethink. So how do you do that in this example and in that example? So in this case, I don't include like you'll want to have lots of illustrations. The more personal nonfiction is, the better it's going to be. But you've got these different structures. Even nonfiction has very similar kind of plotting. And certainly when you get to memoir, it is mostly fiction, except you got to be more careful with the particular details because it's actually talking about real people. But that's one of the things memoir is put in nonfiction because it's not invented, but it follows all these story structure elements. So that's something, if you're writing memoir, you want to study up on how to write fiction more than nonfiction is not going to help you that much because that's more thinking of like how to get along with your spouse or how to succeed in business. That's generally nonfiction structure. Okay, so here are the ones I told you I would show you in the Bible. This is a chiasm. So it opens with A, Noah and his sons, and then at the very bottom, you have Noah and his sons heading out into their new life. It talks about all life on earth. So you see how it's coming in, and at the very middle where the X is, that's the key. God remembers Noah. So I think that's kind of interesting that they put it there. I just pulled this from online, so I hadn't read it all, but that makes it so beautiful. And what you'll notice, these are all through the Bible. Every time you run into one of them, it makes the way it hits your heart at that God remembers Noah moment so much stronger. You're going to feel the emotion. And then as things get better, because God's remembered Noah, every point below that is like, oh, yes, he's done it. Huh. And it's wonderful for the way stories can be cathartic, as I said, is that um, it helps you feel that sense of God's got this. It's all going to be okay, and I'm okay. So here's another one that shows the entire flow of history. And it literally has a cross. It's not in an X shape, but still the cross is the center of history. You have God creating at both ends. Um, this particular one doesn't have the garden. The first time I was introduced to this concept, it mentioned how you have the Garden of Eden and then you have paradise in the new heavens and the new earth. There are so many different chiastic elements that God just loves this structure. So if you have a chance to have like a pivot point in your story, a decision is made and things start to shift, if you can consciously echo things that had happened at the beginning, except bringing it to resolution, it's a truly beautiful thing. So that's probably my favorite structure, as you can tell. All right. So once you've got a first draft done, then it's time to do copy editing. And this, if you can do it yourself, by all means do it. And then you can bring in an editor. And these are the kinds of things where the normal editor, well, the copy editor is coming in at this point. They're going to make sure if you have writing fiction, are your characters consistent? And this is everything from what color is their hair to their personality. One of the things that I find frustrating when I watch children's shows that like they'll have a complete movie and then they'll want to have another character arc with the same character. So they'll make them have unlearned or forgotten everything that they had developed in their character from the last one movie. And it really frustrates me. It's like, come on, they already learned that. Like they can have some other area of growth. So, but how's the character arc? Are they being tested in ways that they were immature before? And are they growing consistently? Does this make sense for them to act at the level they are at this point in the story? So you have all of that. I have heard some copy editors and authors will write out all the list of details about how the person looks and where they are at the beginning, so their level of maturity. Then same thing with the settings. Are the settings believable? Are they consistent? Is there enough? This is a point at which you go back and you remember to plug in all 5 of your senses. This was one of the first things that I learned about storytelling, and I really dislike it. But if you think about it, in a movie, you hear things and you see things. You do not smell things, you do not feel things, and you cannot taste things. In a book, everything is theater of the mind. You aren't seeing or hearing anything either, but just as you're having to imagine those two, you can also imagine the other senses just as well as you can imagine what you're seeing and hearing. So let's take advantage of that. The more you can have roughness and I remember one story I read, and I had not encountered it in real life, where this lady walks into a sick room and she talks about the sickly sweet smell of the air and how it was hard to breathe in that space. And then later, as I was around people who are struggling, especially if your lungs, if you've ever had a bad lung cold, it does have this weird sick smell when you're sneezing and coughing a lot. And I recognized it because I had read that story. It's like she knew what she was talking about. And that's the kind of thing we can draw out from our readers, either to bring up their memories or to prepare them so when they run into the real world, it's like, oh, that's what she meant, or he. So that's something else. This is a time to include that. Then, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, the tone of voice for both the narrator and dialogue, it needs to stay consistent depending who is speaking. So I had one blogger that I got to help and was great. I was volunteering and I said, "Hey, I love what you're doing for special needs homeschooling, but can I talk to you about it?" And this is one of the things. She had all this academic stuff. She even knew when we talked, said, "I know I sound too formal because she has a PhD. She's been around that kind of writing a lot." And then she was talking about kiddos. It's like, wait a minute, that doesn't go together. You can't say, you can't have the passive formal writing and then talk about kiddos in the same paragraph. It doesn't fit. It's got to have a flow to it. And in this case, she didn't want to turn off her struggling moms and dads. So she needed to really tone down the formality, bring it. And for informal, one real great trick that I use all the time is contractions. If you're writing formally, you use cannot. If you're informal, you use can't. And then there are other things with dialogue, like don't overdo the colloquialisms. If you've ever read an old story where it has all the stuff, like even Hagrid in Harry Potter, where it's hard to read because there's so many letters dropped off, so you're supposed to hear his accent. That's kind of frowned on now. More we're recommended to use word choice to express, or sentence structure to express the different style of a character. And then there's yours. If you're writing a nonfiction, it's in your voice, but it needs to stay consistent. All right, then copy editing. At some point when you're writing, you're going to just want to vomit on the page. Just get the thoughts and ideas out of your head. However messy it is, it's inevitable. That creative part of your brain is messy, and that's okay. Go with it. Turn off spell check if you have to. Ignore all those squiggles. But this is a time where you go back and say, okay, I love this idea. I love this scene. I love whatever it is. I don't think it goes here. Let's see, is there a place I can move it, or am I going to have to kill my baby just to keep the book on track? Is this going to have to go? Maybe I can turn it into a blog article or something to rescue it. And I do know some authors I've heard will take those scenes that they just love and collect it in a folder so it can be like an idea starter, like a sourdough starter for some other project down the road, so they don't ever throw it away. So then they feel better about taking it out of the book if it doesn't fit. All right, then, like ratio of various elements. On a book project that I had, there would be 300 words of, and it was a nonfiction, 300 words discussing a topic in a chapter, and then it was over 2,000 of illustrations. It's like, this isn't going to work. And it's not a fiction book, a memoir type of story with a little bit of explanation. This is an explanation book with some illustrations sprinkled in. So you got to watch for that kind of thing. Just sheer word count can help. And how much is like that pain point when you got a book that's 2/3 pain point and 1/3 solution? That's not a healthy ratio. So that's something else to be aware of. Um, Also, if you've got in fiction, you've got point of view. Are we staying in one person's head or are we hopping heads? That's something that happens all the time. And again, at some point when you're just getting it out onto the page, don't worry about this so much, but this is the point where you need to have it consistent, where you should only have ideally one or two, maybe three people's whose heads you're inside of where you can think their thoughts, and keep it consistent. And then also you'll want to check your facts. Could they actually have drunk Coca-Cola in 1850? That kind of thing. This is when, and your editor is going to want you, if they're having to check whether you're right, they're going to charge you a pretty penny for that. It's the author's responsibility to say, okay, I claim that this historical event happened here, or if it's nonfiction, this person said that. You've got to be able to back it up. This is when you're building your bibliography and all that. So this is the middle stage, copy editing. All right, now, once all that is cleared up, and only once all that is how you want it, then it's time to move on to what I always thought editing was. And that's your grammar, punctuation, and then eventually typos. This is when you zoom in to a single sentence. Some editors will even, to catch everything as that they possibly can, read from the back to the front, so they're not following the thought and what they expect to see on the page. They're only seeing what's on the page. This is when you pull out your style manual to see, does this get a comma here? Is this a restrictive clause? And that kind of thing. And I learned the hard way to check my scripture references. In my own book, when I went through, because I was putting together a script to do a audiobook, I realized I had to copy out the scripture to read, and I had at least a dozen errors, and I had already uploaded to KDP. Now, it hadn't worked for Ingram Spark, so I saved that money, but I was horrified. So even if you're really good at scripture references, I've got one lady I'm working with right now, her numbers are always right, but she had accidentally put John instead of Revelation, and that kind of thing happens. So if you're working with scripture, that's something else to add to besides your sentence structure. And as I say, please don't expect an editor to take something that you haven't done all the earlier levels of editing to and have them just fix this. You'll embarrass yourself, and people won't even tell you why. They're like, oh, it was a lovely book, and they never tell a soul. So if you want word of mouth, you've got to have everything else done and not just expect this to be the only editing you need. All right, once that's all done, now it's time for proofreading and formatting. I prefer not to do this. I have a couple of people, certainly for the blog I manage, I am the proofreader. It's a totally different part of your brain that you're working with. One of the things, this is the one, I have a friend who says, no, don't have somebody do this for free, because there's so many people who've been to English class and think it's illegal to start a sentence with an and they're trying to change stuff. That's not what a true proofreader should be even looking for. All a proofread should be doing is watching for typos, and they can catch like missing comma, or where you accidentally have a semicolon instead of a period. Well, whatever, the wrong punctuation mark, or the quotation mark is on the outside versus the inside, however you want it. So I actually, because most of my authors are on a very tight budget, is like, hey, have a couple of friends look it over, as long as they're not going to try to change the sentence structure and stuff. The more eyes, the better, because you're always going to catch stuff. And a lot of us will switch fonts, printing it out. Anytime you change what it looks like, you're going to catch things that you were sure were there, because your brain is so good at filling in that you'll see the missing preposition or whatever, and your brain is sure you read it and it's not actually on the page. This is when you bring Grammarly in, although you have to be really careful. Grammarly has some really odd ideas, and it does not understand normal human communication. So you have to be willing to tell it, absolutely not, that's ridiculous, and turn it off. But it can help. We all use that, or Perfect It is pretty pricey. It's over $100 a month, but that's another one that editors will use because it's so hard to catch everything. And for the fine details, the computer can be really useful. All right. Then whenever it's going to go live, you're going to want to check what it looks like on the page. So if this is a blog article, I always do a preview of what it looks like in my theme, what it's going to look like to readers before I publish, because you never know when something's going to go wonky with the look. And if you're printing, even with KDP, look at the galleys that they show you. This is something, and by all means, get somebody professional to do this, but expect to have to look it over. Make sure you don't say, I'm releasing this on Monday, and you don't do the proof, send in the galley until Monday morning. That's not going to work. You're going to need to check it over and expect to have to re-upload your file. Okay, so a couple last thoughts. Like I said, with my own book, it was only after my book was up on KDP that I realized I had the mistakes on all the scripture references. It's super easy to re-upload a file. Not so easy on Ingram Spark. And I've had some friends, personally, I haven't looked through. Chicago Manual of Style is as thick as a New York phone book. And I have had friends who have noticed errors in it where they've got some typos. So if even they, who are talking about how to be perfect, are not themselves perfect, it's going to be okay. People aren't going to judge you because they find a handful of typos through a 400-page book. They will if there's a typo a page. And the whole point of this, and something you want to watch for when you hire an editor, is, are they looking at it from the reader's perspective? Is their goal to help your message, your story, what's inside of you, get through to the reader's heart and mind? That's the whole goal. This is what we're aiming for. All right. Before I move on, I got a couple more things I want to show you about Word. So any questions before I move on?
Oh, yes, style. Recently I was listening to an audio tape by Michael Connolly, and I understand Michael Connolly's characters for this one is the Lincoln lawyer, and you get a lot of swearing because it's kind of
Oh,
the
sure.
character main character deals with. But I'm wondering, as a Christian writer, I get a little hesitant about expletives. So what I understand, there's a better way of expressing character without the foul language.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your take
Sure.
on something like that,
Yeah.
if you could.
Yeah, no, that's not generally my area of expertise, because the most I do in fiction is through middle grade young adult. But I will say I love how Rowling handles it in Harry Potter. She has Ron Weasley have a fairly foul mouth towards the end, but you never hear it. You just hear that Harry's thinking his mom would not have wanted to hear that word. So that's the way to do it if it's someone else. If it's inside the main character's head, that probably wouldn't work. But other than that, you can talk to, I know Michelle does stuff like that. And there's quite a range of opinion. I'm on christianwriters.com and have been for a decade. They'll have this discussion every once in a while. And it's really a matter of personal taste. And you'll want to check with the publisher. If you're indie publishing, you do whatever you believe is clear with your conscience. If you're with a publisher, it's probably not a good idea unless they're more comfortable with edgy stuff. But Any other questions about editing in general? Yes, Shimri?
I don't have a question, but I just have a comment for that question, being a fiction writer and having characters that are not so savory, and it stretches belief. If their language is perfectly clean, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So you do have to bend a little bit, but there are ways you can do that and not offend your reader.
Yeah.
I have them using other words that sound sort of like that,
Gonna
but are
say,
not, you know.
in
you
your
know.
genre, Shimri, you can invent swear words like
Exactly.
Rolling did with her mudblood. Yeah, but I want to stay on topic because I got a few more things to show. Any other questions about editing in general? All right, so let me go ahead and share. I just want to show you how many of you have worked with an editor at all or know much about how the editing section of Microsoft Word works. Anyone done that before? Yeah, Nancy. Yeah, a couple of you. So let me show you, because this is something, again, when I started, I didn't know anything about this. And I started out working with blogs, which WordPress is a kind of different thing. But I'm going to show you on Word. I've got pulled up here. So I've got just a general, this is actually my own writing, so you can use it. Let's see, I got to go up to the top. So in Word, you're usually up here in the home section where you've got all your basic formatting. And like if you're going to do self-publishing, a lot of times they'll teach you how to adjust these styles. So that's something you'll be doing on your own. But I wanted to show you what I've added here, which are comments and track changes. So if you go to the review panel in Word, it offers you all these different things over here. And I mostly use the comments and then the track changes. So when I have a client, I'll offer them the option. Do they want quick and trust me, or do they want to see everything? Do they want more control over what I'm doing so they can undo? If they've given me permission to go ahead and change things, they can accept or reject things. So track changes allow you to do that. For here, I have track changes on. And what it did was every time, like here, I decided to take out the were in the first sentence, or even I changed the opening. For centuries, people have long, instead of people have wondered why, I added in, or I took out the for centuries and just changed it to capital people. So you can see that right there. If you want to accept it, you can, let's see, I think the easiest way, yeah, I can accept the deletion and it'll go away. And that's something you can go to over here. You've got next and you can accept it, and you can do that individually. If you like everything you've seen and you don't find all the crossouts and stuff, so you've read it through and you like it, you can accept all. Under here, it has accept and move to the next, accept this change, accept all changes. You can do that if you're like, okay, this looks the way I want it. The other thing that I'll do when I'm working is it has show markup, and I want the comments to show, but like insertions and deletions, I'll take out, because a lot of times when I'm changing something, if I have it all where I see the track changes, I'll miss where I need to have a space or something is missing. So if you turn that off where it's not showing the insertions and deletions and you like how it reads, then you can just accept all changes and move on. Super easy. It'll even show you, like here, I decided to change the heading just to show you guys. And over here, me, the editor, as editor, added what I did and why. If you like it, you can resolve it, and it'll still be there for your editor to see. Me, when I get it back and it's all still messy, I can actually delete the comment and it goes away. So it's fairly straightforward how that works. Most of what I do is making these comments, and you can reply like thanks or whatever. And I love it when my authors are like, yeah, that worked. That really encourages me that they understood what I was working with or doing there. Sometimes I'll end up with a whole like I had one theological is like, I got to push back on this concept. And they said, well, here's what I'm actually meaning. It's like, okay, let's put this on the page. So we ended up with a whole thread, finally got it all on the page the way we needed it. And then I could delete the whole string. So it's not that complicated what you'll work with an editor. But if you've never done that before and don't even know how to find all that stuff, like right now, I'm helping edit a lady that when she wanted to delete something, instead of deleting it, she put strike through the old words. So then I had to figure out she meant to delete it, and I had to delete it for her. It's like, okay, that's a different way of using word. But that's a pretty basic on what you'll experience when you work with an editor. The other thing that will change is as you're getting to the last stages of formatting. I have done some for myself. I actually used Reedsy's book formatter. It has a little line on my title page of my book that says this was formatted at Reedsy.com. But for me, that little thing was worth it because it didn't cost me anything. Sorry, Michelle, but I didn't have the budget for her. And they did a beautiful job. I really loved how it turned out. So because my book project, both of necessity and because I wanted to have experienced what indie publishing was like for my own clients, the only thing I paid any money for was the ISBNs. So Reedsy is an excellent option, but if you don't want that and you have the money to pay somebody like Michelle, they'll help you walk through. Like one of the things that Word does offer you is the where your headers become outline index at the beginning. So whether it's a fiction or nonfiction, you can that will be automatic. But I know that a lot of publishers do not want you to use that. So I want to show you a couple more things in our last few minutes, or it should only take a couple minutes. Working with style guides. So here's one I just picked up, and that's Chicken Soup for the Soul. And I'm actually keeping it for my clients because what I loved right here at the beginning, they're filled with vivid images created by using the five senses. A lot of times, while I've picked up a lot of information about how story works and how you just never do these things and you always do those things. When my client has a very different opinion, if it's just my opinion versus theirs, why should mine win? And I don't want to be that kind of person either. So Chicken Soup for the Soul does a good job of spelling out what they're looking for. And then I have another one here is Elk Lake Publishing is a group where I help them. They're kind of a hybrid where the author pays some money up front, but they get my help without having to pay it up front. I get royalties. And they walk you through very specifically what kind of document, what font to use, and then they have pages and pages. There's another one I have where it's 36 pages long for more academic biblical scholarly works. And I look at these for when I am like formatting a book reference in a footnote. How do they want it set up? What gets italics? Where does the year go? So that's something else. Every publisher will have a different one. Having some kind of guide like this or walk through, KDP even tells you what they need. And then if you can possibly afford it, there are 2 style manuals. Let's see, did I turn off? Okay, have I stopped sharing now? There are 2 style manuals that I use all the time. Chicago Manual of Style for the United States is the standard for book publishing, and all the other book publishing guides in our country use that. I have no idea what it is for UK. Sorry about that. And then the Christian Writers Manual of Style is based off of that and gives you all kinds of things like don't capitalize divine pronouns. We can figure out who he is and that kind of thing. So those are the ones whenever I have a Christian project, I have those 2 books out. They do have online subscriptions. They're not exactly cheap, but if you're going to do serious writing, it costs less than $200 or less than $100 for the both of them. So that's something I use all the time when I'm working with the finer details of like my restricted clauses. My book falls open to all the commas. So we got a couple minutes. Any questions or comments, Kim?
Hey, Cheri. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just wanted to say on Chicago Manual,
Yeah.
I tend to use the American language style a little more. I think it depends on what kind of work you're doing. Chicago
Okay.
Manual, I think, is excellent for nonfiction. It tends to be written for journalistic
Okay.
writing, that's originally what it was for.
Sure.
So it is the standard,
Mhm.
okay? But if you're writing fiction and it's a little bit more personable or a little bit more contemporary,
Sure.
I tend to not use Chicago Manual as much.
Huh.
I tend to use
That's
the
interesting.
language.
Yeah.
I really like it better. It's a more sorry for those of you across the pond, but it is really, as
Yeah.
far as the language goes.
Right. Yeah.
When we know how to spell color and favorite in that. So yeah, so there
Yeah.
are, but yeah, so I think that's a great one. Great presentation.
Oh,
Really good.
thanks.
Lots of
Yeah.
information.
Well, it's the kind of thing, if somebody had explained this to me 8 years ago, it would have been awesome. Go ahead, Gordon.
Yeah, and just a wealth of information here as always. Thank you so much. Just tremendous. I would offer, if you're publishing for theological academic
Right.
resources, you've got to use the Society of Biblical Literature, SBL. They require that footnote system. So,
Right.
but that,
Well, and that depends, because I've got an author, a PhD guy, and he uses something else. So it's something where you're going to want to find out where you're publishing and who your audience is. But yeah, that I'm sure that's great too.
Cynthia had a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Kim, what was that? What was the manual that you were talking about?
ALA? Is that it?
Kim?
I think she's muted. You're muted. Yeah, because I had not heard of it.
Yeah, Kim. Oh, there you go.
Okay, yeah, I can send you a copy of it. Yeah.
Sure.
So, but I really like it because it's kind of, more conversational,
Sure.
more clear in dialogue, that kind of thing. I like it a little better.
Also, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I also say a lot of times I will look online. If it's Grammar Girl, she's probably right. And that can often be faster than looking it up in one of the big manuals. So a lot of times when you have things that are debated or optional, there are some you can look online and do just fine. It's just if you're working for a publisher, they will tell you. And as best I know, most of the Christian publishers that I'm aware of use the Chicago Manual of Style and the Christian Writers Style Guide. Those are the ones that if you're wanting to be traditionally published, you're more likely to end up with. And that, again, this is talking about the fine details at the end. So by then you should be already working with the publisher, get whatever they're saying, or their editors will help you. So, but if you're indie publishing, pick one that works for you and just make sure that level does have to be done if you're going to have credibility. Because I don't know about you, but I've been online and been reading through something that looked quite professional. Maybe they're doing a product review and then their grammar is atrocious. And I'm like, I don't think if they don't take their English seriously, are they really taking whatever they're talking about seriously? And you can't avoid that. So make sure it gets done somehow. So any other questions about yeah, go ahead. Oh, who is that?
Kathy.
Grammarly, as an author, Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly are your friends. Something like that,
Yes.
I mean, that's where you need to start.
But be careful with Grammarly. When it tells you to restructure your sentences, it'll take out all your tone. It will take out your style. Don't let them do it. Oh, go ahead, Kathy.
Pro Writing Aid is more for writers, so I find it better than Grammarly.
Sure.
Which
ahead,
one was
sorry.
that, Shamri?
Pro
Which one?
Writers Aid. Pro
Okay.
Writers Aid. It's really worth it.
Yeah. Okay. So are you saying, Cheri, that when you're writing and, you're referring to the Lord, like he said, meaning the
Yes.
Lord, it
Yes.
should not be capitalized.
Right. There are a few, like for me, I'm constantly dealing with people, especially of a certain age, that they would think it was blasphemy to lowercase. And I know like Martin Luther changed the entire language of German. Every noun is capitalized because he didn't want to ever have a divine noun that wasn't. But if you look at King James, it's not capitalized. NASB, that's the other thing. If you really like the NASB, and there are a couple of others, that's the most popular one, it capitalizes all those things, then you go ahead and capitalize it to match. That's one of the things, is you always want consistency. At some point, as long as you're indie publishing, so for me with my clients, whatever they say at the end goes, but it has to be consistent. But as a general rule, it is Victorian, it is old-fashioned fuddy-duddy to capitalize your divine pronouns. You can get over it, just like you stop doing the double spaces after sentences. It can be changed, and you realize God doesn't really care. So
Okay. All right. That's great.
yeah.
I think we had a conversation about this when I first joined.
Okay.
Whether or not to do that, but okay. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Right. And I've had group I work with where I pointed out that like he made him to be sin for us. I forget what the verse, it has like 5 divine pronouns, both God and the Father and the Son, and it's all lowercase in King James, and they were shocked, and then they ended up going with divine pronouns as their group themselves. So you have the right to say, for me, it feels so awkward, but be aware if you're working with a publisher, they'll probably want you to lowercase. So we got 2 minutes. Any more questions? The other thing I'll say is, if you have an editor who is like totally stripping the tone and the style, or just being hard-nosed, you've got to do this way, and it's something that's more a feeling, it's not you have to have a comma here kind of deal. If they're trying to really change your words, and I've had some clients who've had really bad experiences, find a different editor. Those of us who are good we know where you are. Most of us are writers too. We're going to treat you with great respect, and we can usually back up why we say, hey, this particular thing isn't coming across to the reader the way you seem to think it is. Let's clarify it. We'll have good reasons why we want to change your words.
And remember too, that you will be the person marketing your book. So, it is our job as editors, I'm sure Michelle will agree with this too, that to strengthen your voice and make you proud of that voice so that you can stand up and say, this is what I created.
Yeah.
This purpose. And so if someone is not doing that in editing, then, really, I would agree, move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
A good editor isn't going to try to do that to you. And we'll be like, this is not clear. It's not coming across, but we won't be, you're not allowed to have this kind of tone. If I have, depending on the project, I'll allow ain't. That's the other thing. My webs in America, the Merriam-Webster dictionary is the spelling to go with, like, especially if you have hyphenated words. But if Merriam-Webster says it's real, you're allowed to use it, and ain't is in there. I had one editor I showed that to. She's like, oh, I can't believe it. It's like, well, sorry. So it would certainly be used for very informal. But if that's your style, and that's something, I think I've got 1 or 2 in my book for teens. So that kind of thing. If you got somebody who's so straight-laced, they won't allow that kind of thing, there's probably an issue.
I think the word, I have to double check, but I think the word irregardless has shown up in the dictionary now.
Oh dear. Well, I would probably.
Or they're contemplating that.
Yeah, no, if that kind of thing, because it adds nothing, it doesn't even make you sound colloquial. It just makes you sound like you haven't been educated very well. I would probably say, please, for the love of all that's holy, or grammatically correct, please just take off the IR. It means the same thing.
I was going to say, as being edited, the editor that I've used for quite some time, he's quite good in that he and I grew up in the same part of the country. And, in Kentucky, it can be, well, especially his part was kind of more hick. And he'll say, oh, come on, now you sound like a backwoods hick. Don't use that, or, he'll point out when all of a sudden it changes, like that kind of changed from what you were writing. And that sounds,
yes, right.
I really appreciate that,
Yeah, that's one of the things I know all of us, I'm sure, experience this. Have you ever practically been able to hear the way author was writing? That music. It's something I am naturally good at, and then I am very conscious of listening for the music, the tone, the style. But to me, because I'm also a pianist, and you too, Nancy, you would understand this, I'm listening for that pitch and rhythm and all the music of words. So when it goes off kilter, it's jarring. And that will happen to a reader, even if they don't know what's happening. Your editor should be able to say, wait a minute, this particular thing doesn't fit the rest of your style. Then ought to be that good. I don't recommend putting in something jarring on purpose, but if you have an editor who catches that stuff, no, you've got a natural. And we probably won't be the proofreader stage editor either.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say one more thing. I'm working with a gentleman who's very sensitive about what he's writing. And as helping him, he has asked me questions like, it's more memoir than anything, but he says the other day, do you think that, his first question was, do you think this is offensive, what I've written? Is this offensive to Christians? Okay, so we discussed that, and I didn't find it so, although he had some things in his writings I've never experienced. But I told him, for me, you always came back to what I see as clear-cut Christianity. But the other thing was, he asked me one day, do you think this is a selfish writing? And he was concerned about that.
That's a good question.
And do you think this is just self-serving and selfish? Is there any good reason I wrote all this? And I thought it was very, I don't know, kind of wise to think about this, bounce off somebody.
Right.
Because, sometimes maybe we don't know.
Yeah, that's where I put it near the beginning is, what is this going to add value? I learned this from Cecil Murphy. He paid for me to go to a writer's conference right when I was getting started. He's like, okay, God wants me to do this. And he was part of that answer. And his big thing that I took away was, you're requiring of your readers something they can never get back. And that's time on this mortal coil. He didn't say it that way, but the time they spend on your words they can never get back. Are you blessing them? And that is just as true with a story as it is with nonfiction. But if you're writing only because you want to, or even being wordy, because that's something that's why I cut wordiness, because if you can say the same thing in one sentence that you originally had in 3, cut 2, get to the case. It's about chase for others. But I know it's already after 12, Tom. I was thinking it would be really fun to have like a panel discussion on what do we think on Christian writing, to not offend, what fits into Christian writing and what's going beyond the pale. That would be really fun to do.
There you go, Nancy. Nancy schedules the program, so yeah,
right.
That's good.
Yeah, thank you.
Cheri, thank you so much.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
Good. Well, there's a lot of information, so everybody please remember this is recorded, and within a week or so, it'll be available if you want to go back and because review is a good thing.
Yeah, it took me 10 years to get to this point.
Yeah. Okay. Everybody, wonderful day, a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.
Thanks all. Thank you, Cheri.
Bye. Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Cheri. It was great.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If this topic has helped you out in any way, we'd love for you to take just a second and leave us a comment or leave us a thumbs up on the video. It really goes a long way in helping us and helping the YouTube algorithm know that this is valuable content and to share it to other people. If you want to learn more about Christian Authors Community, we would encourage you to visit our website at authorscommunity.net. We hope that you guys have a wonderful day.